The season of 1847 had begun with all the splendour London society could muster, yet Edmund Ashford, Viscount Thornwood, regarded it with the same weary indifference he had cultivated over 25 years of navigating the aristocratic world. Standing in the drawing-room of Thornwood House, he gazed through the tall windows overlooking Berkeley Square, watching the carriages arrive for yet another soirée his mother had insisted upon hosting. The late afternoon light gilded the brass, fittings and cast long shadows across the Persian carpets, but Edmund felt none of the warmth. He felt, as he had felt for months now, perhaps years, a profound emptiness that all the privileges of his station could not fill. "My lord, Lady Pemberton and Miss Hartley have arrived," his butler intoned from the doorway. Edmund turned slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his perfectly tailored evening coat. Miss Clara Hartley. The name stirred something in him that he refused to acknowledge, a tightness in his chest, an awareness that irritated him precisely because he could not dismiss it. She had been a fixture in his life for 3 years now, ever since her widowed mother had become his mother's dearest companion. 3 years of her quiet presence at dinners, musicales, country house parties. 3 years of her standing just at the periphery of his vision, always there when he turned, always ready with some thoughtful observation or gentle assistance that he had come to expect as one expects. The sun to rise. He had never truly looked at her. Not really. She was simply there. "Show them to the blue drawing room," he instructed, his voice carrying the clipped authority that came as naturally to him as breathing. When he entered the drawing room some minutes later, the space was already filled with the soft murmur of feminine conversation. His mother, the Dowager Viscountess, sat in her customary chair by the fire, her silver hair elegantly arranged, her posture impeccable even at 60. Lady Pemberton, round and cheerful, occupied the settee chattering about some charitable endeavour. And there, standing by the pianoforte with her back partially turned, was Miss Clara Hartley. Edmund paused in the doorway, arrested by something he could not name. The evening light from the west-facing windows illuminated her profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the graceful line of her neck rising from the modest collar of her dove-grey gown. Her dark hair was arranged simply, without the elaborate curls and ornaments other young ladies favoured. There was an economy to her beauty, a quietness that refused to announce itself, but which, once noticed, became impossible to ignore. "Edmund, darling, do come in," his mother called, her eyes twinkling with that particular gleam he had learned to distrust. "Miss Hartley was just about to play for us. You know how accomplished she is." He moved into the room with measured steps, acutely aware that Clara had turned at the mention of his name. Their eyes met briefly, hers a warm brown, steady and unreadable, before she lowered her gaze in that maddening way she had, as though she were somehow beneath his notice. "Miss Hartley," he acknowledged with a slight bow, his tone formal. "I trust you are well." "Quite well, my lord. I thank you for your inquiry." Her voice was soft but clear, with a musicality that matched the instrument she stood beside. She curtsied, the movement economical and graceful. "Then we shall have the pleasure of your performance," he said, moving to take his position by the mantelpiece, the traditional domain of the master of the house. From this vantage, he could observe without appearing to do so, could maintain the distance he preferred. Clara seated herself at the pianoforte, arranged her skirts with unconscious elegance, and placed her fingers upon the keys. The opening notes of a Beethoven sonata filled the room, each phrase shaped with intelligence and feeling. Edmund found himself watching her hands, small, unadorned, moving with quiet confidence across the ivory keys. He watched the slight movement of her shoulders, the way she swayed almost imperceptibly with the music, as though she were not merely playing but conversing with some invisible companion. It was beautiful. She was beautiful. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome. Edmund straightened, annoyed with himself. Miss Hartley was the daughter of a gentleman, certainly, but her circumstances were modest. Her mother depended on his family's patronage. To notice her in that way, to allow his thoughts to drift toward appreciation of anything beyond her utility as a companion to his mother, would be unconscionable. He had responsibilities, a position to maintain. When he married, and he supposed he must eventually marry, it would be to someone of appropriate rank and fortune, someone like Lady Arabella Lennox, the Earl of Waverley's daughter, whose name his mother mentioned with increasing frequency. The music swelled and fell, and Edmund realized with some discomfort that he had not looked away from Miss Hartley for the entire performance. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before his mother and Lady Pemberton broke into enthusiastic applause. "Exquisite, my dear Clara," his mother declared. "Is she not accomplished, Edmund?" "Indeed," he replied, his voice cooler than he intended. "Most proficient." He saw it then, the briefest flicker of something across Clara's face. Disappointment? Pain? It was gone so quickly he might have imagined it. She rose from the pianoforte, murmured her thanks, and returned to stand beside her mother with that same quiet composure she always maintained. The evening progressed with dinner and cards, and Edmund fulfilled his duties as host with practiced ease. He spoke when appropriate, listened when required, and all the while he was conscious of Clara's presence in a way that disturbed him. She sat beside Lady Pemberton, her hands folded in her lap, participating in conversation only when addressed directly. She laughed at his mother's anecdotes, a soft, genuine laugh that made something twist in his chest. She served tea with such natural grace that it seemed she had been born to the task, anticipating needs before they were voiced. Useful, competent, invisible. Except she was no longer invisible to him, and Edmund resented this sudden awareness intensely. As the evening drew to a close and the guests prepared to depart, Edmund found himself in the entrance hall performing the final courtesies. Lady Pemberton embraced his mother warmly, already discussing their next meeting. Clara stood quietly to one side, her cloak already fastened, waiting as she always waited, patient, undemanding, present. "Miss Hartley," Edmund heard himself say, and she turned to him with an expression of polite inquiry. "I wonder if I might impose upon your time tomorrow afternoon. My mother mentioned that you have some familiarity with cataloguing, and I find myself in need of assistance with the library at Thornwood Manor. We shall be removing there for the summer, and the collection has grown rather unwieldy." It was true that the library needed attention, but Edmund could not have explained even to himself why he had made this request now, why the thought had formed itself into words before he could examine it properly. Clara's eyes widened slightly, the first unguarded expression he had seen from her all evening. Yes, my lord. I should be honored to assist, if you are certain I possess the necessary skills. My mother speaks highly of your capabilities," he replied, maintaining his formal tone, even as something within him reacted to the soft color that rose in her cheeks. "Shall we say 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock," she repeated, and for a moment they stood there in the gaslit entrance hall, the sounds of departure fading around them, and Edmund experienced the strangest sensation, as though he was standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous, something that would alter the careful geography of his controlled existence. Then Lady Pemberton called for her daughter, the moment shattered, and Clara curtsied and departed into the night. Edmund stood in the doorway long after the carriage had disappeared down the square, the cool April air washing over him. His mother appeared at his elbow, her presence announced by the rustle of silk. "She is a remarkable young woman," the dowager said softly. "She is adequate to the task," Edmund replied, his voice deliberately flat. His mother was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, there was something in her tone that made Edmund's shoulders tense. "Your father stood in this very doorway the night he realized he loved me. He told me years later that it terrified him, that sensation of the world shifting beneath his feet. Mother, I am simply engaging temporary assistance for a practical matter. Of course, darling," she patted his arm, "I am certain that is precisely what it is." She returned inside, leaving Edmund alone with the night and a growing unease he could neither name nor dismiss. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight. The season had just begun, and Edmund Ashford, Viscount Thornwood, who had successfully avoided emotional entanglement for 29 years, felt the first hairline fracture appear in the armor he had so carefully constructed around his heart. He did not yet know that the quiet woman in the grey gown, who had stood beside him for 3 years unnoticed and uncomplaining, had loved him for every single one of those days. Nor did he know that she had finally resolved, with the desperate courage of the perpetually overlooked, that this season would be her last attempt to make herself seen, Tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, something would begin that neither of them could prevent. A terrible and beautiful unraveling that would test everything Edmund believed about duty, pride, and the dangerous vulnerability of allowing oneself to love. The library at Thornwood Manor occupied the entire eastern wing of the house, a testament to 3 generations of scholarly aristocrats who had collected books with the same fevered dedication other families collected racehorses or mistresses. Edmund had spent his childhood here, escaping into volumes of history and philosophy, while his father conducted estate business and his mother entertained in the drawing rooms below. It was his sanctuary, the one place where the weight of expectation felt bearable, where he could be something other than the heir, the title, the continuation of a lineage stretching back to the conquest. He stood now before the tall windows overlooking the gardens, watching the gravel drive for the approach of Lady Pemberton's modest carriage. 2 o'clock had come and gone by 10 minutes, and Edmund felt an unfamiliar restlessness that annoyed him intensely. He had spent the morning reviewing estate accounts with his steward, conducting the business that comprised his actual life, the management of lands, tenants, investments. This afternoon's arrangement was a trivial matter, barely worth his attention, certainly not worthy of this peculiar anticipation that tightened his chest and made him check his pocket watch twice in as many minutes. When the carriage finally appeared, Edmund turned from the window with deliberate slowness, composing his features into their customary expression of polite indifference. He heard voices in the entrance hall below, his butler's deep tones and a softer, feminine reply, and then footsteps ascending the main staircase. "Miss Hartley, my lord," his butler announced from the doorway. Clara entered with the same quiet grace she brought to every situation, but today Edmund noticed details he had not allowed himself to observe before. Her day dress was a simple muslin in pale green, modest and neat, but it complemented the warm tones of her complexion in a way that made him wonder if she understood her own loveliness. She carried a worn leather portfolio under one arm, and her hair was arranged practically, swept back to reveal the elegant architecture of her face. When she met his eyes, there was a steadiness in her gaze that he found both attractive and unsettling. "Miss Hartley, you are very punctual," he said, which was a lie. She was late, but he found himself unwilling to begin their time together with criticism. "I apologize for my delay, my lord. Our carriage encountered some difficulty with a wheel." She moved into the room, her eyes widening as she took in the scale of the collection. "Good heavens. Your mother mentioned the library was extensive, but I had not imagined there must be several thousand volumes." 5,347 at last count, Edmund replied, experiencing a flicker of pride despite himself. "My grandfather began the collection in earnest, though there were books at Thornwood before his time. He had particular interests in classical history and natural philosophy." Clara crossed to the nearest shelf, her fingers trailing along the spines with the reverence of someone who truly valued books rather than merely collecting them for show. "Marcus Aurelius," she murmured, drawing out a leather-bound volume. "In the original Latin. How extraordinary." "You read Latin?" Edmund heard the surprise in his own voice and regretted it. Clara glanced at him, over her shoulder, and there was something in her expression that might have been amusement. "My father was a scholar before circumstances required him to take a living in Hertfordshire. He believed that education should not be constrained by one's sex. I read Latin, Greek, and French with some fluency, and I have a working knowledge of German." Edmund absorbed this information, recalibrating his understanding of the woman he had dismissed as merely adequate. "That is unusual. I am aware, my lord." She returned the book to its place with care. "It has occasionally been suggested to me that such accomplishments are wasted on a woman of modest fortune who must make her way in the world. I have never shared that view." There was no bitterness in her tone, but Edmund felt an uncomfortable twist of recognition. He thought of his own mother, who had been educated far beyond the norm for her time, who could discourse on politics and philosophy with an intelligence that his father had both valued and, Edmund suspected, sometimes found threatening. Women were not supposed to be intelligent, or rather, they were not supposed to show their intelligence in ways that made men uncomfortable. Clara, it seemed, possessed learning that exceeded many gentlemen of his acquaintance, yet she had hidden it beneath that quiet demeanor. What else, he wondered suddenly, had she been hiding? I confess I requested your assistance under somewhat false pretenses, Edmund said, surprising himself with the admission. The library does require cataloguing, that much is true, but I suspect my mother engineered this arrangement with the hope that we might become better acquainted. Clara turned fully to face him, her portfolio still clutched against her chest like armor. The afternoon light from the windows illuminated her face, and Edmund saw a complexity in her expression that he had never permitted himself to notice before. Intelligence, wariness, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope struggling against resignation. I am aware of your mother's intentions, my lord, she said quietly. The Dowager has been very kind to me and my mother these past 3 years. She has made no secret of her affection for me, nor of her desire to see you settled. Settled, Edmund repeated, the word tasting bitter. What a perfectly bloodless term for the transaction that is matrimony among our class. Clara flinched slightly, and Edmund realized his cynicism had struck her more directly than he intended. She moved to the large oak table at the center of the library, setting down her portfolio with careful precision. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quiet dignity that made him feel suddenly ashamed. Not all marriages are transactions, my lord. My parents married for love. They had very little fortune between them, but they built a life of genuine companionship and mutual respect. When my father died, my mother grieved so deeply I feared we might lose her as well. That is not the behavior of someone fulfilling a transaction. Edmund crossed to the window again, unable to hold her gaze. Your parents were fortunate then. Mine were not so blessed. The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than Edmund had intended. His parents' marriage had been perfectly acceptable by society's standards, appropriate in rank, financially advantageous, productive of an heir and a spare. It had also been profoundly cold, a partnership of duty devoid of warmth. His father had maintained discreet liaisons in London, while his mother cultivated her charitable works and social connections. They had been civil, even cordial, but Edmund had never witnessed between them anything resembling the affection he occasionally observed in other households. He heard Clara move closer, though she maintained a respectful distance. I am sorry for that, she said softly, but you are not your father, my lord. You need not repeat his choices. Edmund turned to face her then, struck by the quiet fierceness in her tone. She stood with her hands clasped before her, her posture perfect, but there was nothing subservient in her bearing now. She looked at him directly, without flirtation or artifice, and he felt suddenly exposed in a way he found profoundly uncomfortable. You presume to know me well enough to make such pronouncements? He asked, his tone cooler than he felt. I have observed you for 3 years, my lord. Clara held his gaze steadily. I have watched how you treat your servants, with fairness and consideration. I have seen your devotion to your mother. Even when she vexes you, I have noted your concern for your tenants' welfare and your careful management of the estate. These are not the actions of a man destined to repeat his father's coldness. They are the actions of a man capable of genuine feeling if he would permit himself to experience it. The observation was delivered without drama, a simple statement of fact, but it landed like a blow to Edmund's chest. No one spoke to him with such directness. No one dared to suggest they understood his inner landscape. The presumption should have angered him, yet what he felt instead was a strange mixture of recognition and terror. Recognition that she had indeed seen him, truly seen him in a way no one else had, and terror at what this perception implied. You have a high opinion of your observational skills, he managed, his voice deliberately cold. I have little else to occupy my time, my lord. There was no self-pity in her tone, merely statement of fact. I am not beautiful enough to captivate society's attention, nor wealthy enough to merit pursuit for my fortune. I have learned to see clearly because no one notices when I am watching. Edmund felt something crack inside him at those words, the casual dismissal of her own worth, delivered so matter-of-factly, it was clear she had long ago accepted it as truth. She believed herself unremarkable. She had no comprehension of how her quiet grace eclipsed the artificial charms of the diamonds who dominated each season's marriage market. You are wrong, he said abruptly, the words escaping before he could examine them. About your appearance, you possess a quality that He stopped, appalled at his own loss of composure. Clara's eyes widened, color flooding her cheeks, and for a moment they stood frozen in the golden afternoon light, the library vast and silent. Around them, "Forgive me," Edmund said stiffly. "That was inappropriate." "No." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "It was kind. Kind." The word settled over Edmund like a shroud. He did not wish to be kind to Clara Hartley. Kindness implied a connection he could not afford, an acknowledgement of her as something beyond a convenient companion for his mother. Kindness was the beginning of the sort of weakness his father had scorned, the emotional entanglement that led men to foolish choices and compromised positions. Yet looking at her now, seeing the vulnerable hope in her expression before she quickly concealed it, Edmund felt the foundations of his carefully constructed indifference begin to shift. "Perhaps we should begin the work," he said abruptly, gesturing toward the nearest shelf. "I thought we might start with the classical texts, as you have demonstrated competency in the relevant languages." Clara nodded, visibly composing herself, and moved to where he indicated. They worked in relative silence for the next hour, Edmund retrieving volumes and calling out titles, while Clara recorded them in her neat hand in a ledger he had provided. It should have been tedious, but Edmund found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the soft rustle of her dress as she moved, the way she occasionally murmured a title to herself as though savoring it, the graceful movement of her wrist as she wrote. When they paused for tea, which a servant brought on Edmund's instruction, Clara wandered to the window overlooking the gardens. The spring afternoon was lengthening toward evening, and the light had taken on that particular quality unique to English countryside, soft and golden, making everything appear somehow more gentle than it truly was. "Do you ride, Miss Hartley?" Edmund found himself asking, though he had no idea why this question had formed itself. She turned, teacup held delicately in both hands. "I do, though I have little opportunity in London. My mother and I keep no horses. The stables here are well provisioned. Perhaps you might ride while you are visiting. I could arrange for a suitable mount." The offer emerged without his permission, some part of him desperately seeking ways to extend her presence, to create reasons for her to remain. Clara's expression softened into something that looked dangerously like affection. "That is generous, my lord. I should like that very much." They returned to their work, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them. Edmund found himself telling her about his grandfather, who had assembled much of this collection, describing the old man's eccentricities and passions. Clara listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that demonstrated not mere politeness, but real engagement. She shared anecdotes about her own father, about the tiny vicarage library where she had first discovered the ancient philosophers, about reading Virgil by candlelight, while her mother worried she would ruin her eyes. As the afternoon faded into evening and servants arrived to light the lamps, Edmund realized with some astonishment that he had not thought once about estate business, social obligations, or any of the matters that usually consumed his thoughts. He had been simply present, engaged in conversation with a woman whose company he found unexpectedly compelling. When Clara finally gathered her things to depart, Edmund accompanied her downstairs to where her mother's carriage waited. They stood in the entrance hall, and Edmund searched for words to express something he himself did not fully understand. Gratitude, perhaps, or the desire to repeat this afternoon, or simply the acknowledgement that something significant had occurred. "Thank you for your assistance today, Miss Hartley," he said formally, though the words felt inadequate. "It was my pleasure, my lord." She hesitated, then added softly, "Your grandfather built something beautiful here. It deserves to be properly preserved. Perhaps you might return tomorrow," Edmund heard himself say. "We have barely made a beginning." Clara's face illuminated with a smile that transformed her features from quietly pretty to genuinely radiant. "I should be honored, my lord." After she departed, Edmund stood alone in the now dark library, surrounded by thousands of books and the lingering scent of paper, leather, and something else. The faint trace of lavender that was apparently Miss Hartley's preferred perfume. The ancient wound he carried, the certainty that love was a weakness he could not afford, that emotional connection was simply another form of aristocratic transaction, had begun to heal without his noticing, and he had no idea how to stop the process, even if he wished to. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 7. Edmund remained motionless, suspended between the life he had carefully constructed and a future he had not planned, watching the last light fade from the sky and feeling, for perhaps the first time since childhood, genuinely afraid. The following fortnight passed in a manner that Edmund would later recognize as dangerous, but which, at the time, felt simply inevitable. Clara returned each afternoon at 2 o'clock, and they worked together in the library with a harmony that both pleased and disturbed him. She proved invaluable. Her knowledge surpassed his initial expectations, her organizational instincts were excellent, and her company provided a respite from the relentless formality of his usual existence. They discussed philosophy and history, debated the relative merits of various poets, and shared a love of learning that Edmund had never found with anyone else of his acquaintance. He told himself it was merely intellectual companionship. He told himself that his increasing preoccupation with the clock approaching 2 each day meant nothing significant. He told himself that the way his chest tightened when she smiled was simply appreciation for her, assistance with a tedious task. He was lying to himself with impressive dedication. His mother observed these developments with knowing satisfaction, but to her credit, made no direct comment. She simply ensured that Clara and Lady Pemberton were invited to every social engagement, that Clara was seated near Edmund at dinners, that opportunities for conversation arose with suspicious frequency. Edmund resented his mother's interference, even as he found himself grateful for it, a contradiction. That troubled him during the long nights when sleep proved elusive. The evening of the Waverley Ball arrived with all the pageantry London society demanded. Thornwood House blazed with gaslight, the ballroom filled with the cream of the aristocracy, the air thick with perfume, candlelight, and the murmur of strategic conversations masked as pleasantries. Edmund stood near the refreshment table, fulfilling his duties as host with mechanical precision, when Clara entered on her mother's arm. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that transformed her from quietly pretty to arrestingly beautiful. The color brought out the warmth of her complexion and the depths of her eyes, and her hair was arranged with more elaborate care than usual. She looked, Edmund thought with some shock, magnificent, and the realization that she had clearly taken exceptional care with her appearance tonight made something primitive and possessive stir in his chest. She saw him immediately, as though drawn by the same magnetic force that made him constantly aware of her location in any room. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and Clara's face lit with a smile that was entirely unguarded, entirely for him. Edmund felt his careful composure slip, felt an answering warmth rise in his expression before he could prevent it. "Thornwood, there you are." A hand clapped his shoulder, shattering the moment. "I've been searching everywhere for you." Edmund turned to find himself face to face with Lord Thomas. Ashworth, Earl of Westmere, a school friend, though the term suggested greater intimacy than their adult relationship warranted. Thomas was handsome, charming, wealthy, and possessed of that easy confidence men born to great fortune could afford. He was also, Edmund knew, actively seeking a wife, having finally bowed to family pressure to secure his succession. "Westmere," Edmund acknowledged with a nod. "I trust you are enjoying the evening." "Immensely, particularly now that I've spotted an absolute vision in blue." Thomas's gaze had fixed on Clara with unmistakable interest. "Tell me, who is that lovely creature speaking with your mother? I don't believe I've had the pleasure of an introduction." Edmund's jaw tightened involuntarily. "Miss Clara Hartley, the daughter of Lady Pemberton, a particular friend of my mother's." "Miss Hartley," Thomas repeated, his eyes never leaving Clara. "Is she spoken for?" "She is not engaged, if that is your meaning." Each word felt dragged from Edmund's throat by force. "Excellent." Thomas grinned with the enthusiasm of a man who had never known romantic rejection. "Then you won't mind performing the introduction, old friend? She looks like precisely the sort of woman I've been hoping to meet. Intelligent eyes, modest demeanor. My mother will approve, which is half the battle, is it not?" Edmund wanted to refuse. Every fiber of his being rebelled against the notion of facilitating Thomas's interest in Clara. But what possible reason could he give? He had no claim on her. He had made no declaration, offered no indication that she was anything beyond a temporary assistant with the library project. To refuse would be to reveal the feelings he had not admitted even to himself. "Of course," he heard himself say, the words tasting of ashes. "Please, follow me." He led Thomas across the ballroom, acutely aware of how they must appear. Two aristocratic gentlemen approaching an unattached young lady of modest circumstances. Clara watched their approach with an expression Edmund could not decipher, though he thought he detected a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Mother, Miss Hartley, permit me to introduce Lord Westmere," Edmund said with rigid formality. "Westmere, Miss Clara Hartley and her mother, Lady Pemberton." Thomas bowed with practiced grace, his attention focused entirely on Clara. "Miss Hartley, what a delight. Thornwood has been criminally remiss in not introducing us sooner. Might I have the honor of your next dance?" Clara's eyes flickered to Edmund's face, as though seeking something, permission perhaps, or guidance, or possibly objection. Edmund maintained his impassive expression with supreme effort, giving her nothing. What could he give? What right did he have to interfere? "I should be pleased, Lord Westmere," Clara said softly, and Edmund felt something tear inside his chest as Thomas offered his arm and led her toward the dance floor. He stood rooted to the spot, watching as Thomas guided Clara into position for a waltz. The music began, and they swept into motion, Thomas speaking animatedly while Clara listened with polite attention. They made, Edmund was forced to acknowledge, a handsome couple. Thomas tall and fair, Clara dark and graceful, both moving with the ease of those well-trained in society's rituals. "You look as though you might commit murder, darling," his mother observed quietly at his elbow. Edmund tore his gaze from the dancers. "I have no idea what you mean." "Of course not." His mother's tone suggested she saw through him entirely. "That is why you have been watching Miss Hartley with Lord Westmere as though he were leading her to the gallows rather than merely dancing. Westmere is a friend. If he has taken an interest in Miss Hartley, I can only be pleased for them both." The lie felt heavy on his tongue. "Edmund," his mother's hand touched his arm, "you are my son, and I love you dearly. But you are also being supremely foolish. That young woman has loved you for 3 years with a steadiness and devotion you do not deserve. She has waited patiently, hoped quietly, and asked for nothing. And now, when she finally has the opportunity to attract the notice of another gentleman, one who might actually value her, you stand here pretending indifference." Edmund's facade cracked. "What would you have me do? Make empty declarations I cannot support? She deserves better than a man incapable of offering her what she needs." "You are capable," his mother said fiercely. "You simply lack the courage to try. Your father's coldness was his weakness, not his strength, Edmund. Do not mistake the two." She left him then, moving to greet other guests, and Edmund remained frozen while the music swelled and fell around him. When the waltz ended, Thomas escorted Clara from the floor, then immediately requested another dance, and another. They spent the better part of the evening together, and with each passing dance, each shared laugh. Each moment of apparent connection, Edmund felt his carefully controlled world disintegrate. He should have been pleased. Thomas was an excellent match for Clara. Wealthy, titled, good-natured. He could offer her security, position, a life of comfort and respect. Edmund should have been happy to see her well-placed. Instead, he felt as though someone were extracting his heart through his chest with dull instruments. Near midnight, Edmund retreated to the terrace, unable to bear the spectacle any longer. The cool night air provided temporary relief, though it did nothing to quell the turmoil in his chest. He stood at the stone balustrade, looking out over the darkened gardens, and acknowledged what he had been refusing to admit for weeks. He loved her. He loved Clara Hartley with an intensity that terrified him, loved her quiet intelligence and gentle strength, loved the way she saw him truly, rather than merely his title. He loved her, and he had realized it at precisely the moment when he might be too late to prevent losing her to another man. "My lord?" Edmund spun to find Clara standing in the terrace doorway, bathed in the golden light from the ballroom behind her. She looked uncertain, her earlier radiance dimmed by something he could not name. "Miss Hartley, you should return inside. It is cool and you will catch a chill." She ignored his suggestion, moving instead to join him at the balustrade. "Lord Westmere is very charming," she said quietly. "Indeed." Edmund's voice came out strangled. "He has asked permission to call upon my mother and me tomorrow." He was quite enthusiastic about his interest. She paused, then added with deliberate care, He asked if I were attached to anyone. I told him I was not. Edmund gripped the stone balustrade hard enough that his knuckles whitened. Then I congratulate you on securing such advantageous notice. Do you? Clara turned to face him fully, and in the dim light from the ballroom, Edmund saw tears glistening in her eyes. Do you truly congratulate me, my lord? Or would you prefer I refuse his suit? The question hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Edmund knew this was the moment, the single instant when he could speak the truth, could abandon his pride and fear, and reach for the woman who had somehow become essential to his existence. One word from him, one honest acknowledgement of his feelings, and everything would change. But the words lodged in his throat, strangled by decades of conditioning, by his father's cold example, by the terror of vulnerability. He could not force them past the constriction in his chest, could not bridge the gap between what he felt and what he could express. I want whatever brings you happiness, he managed finally, and even to his own ears it sounded like the cowardice it was. Clara's face crumpled briefly before she mastered it, drawing on reserves of dignity Edmund both admired and despised. I see, she whispered. Then I shall not trouble you further with my presence, my lord. I believe the library cataloguing is sufficiently complete that my assistance is no longer required. Clara, her name escaped before he could prevent it, raw and desperate. But she was already walking away, returning to the ballroom and the warmth and the charming Earl, who had sufficient courage to pursue what he wanted. Edmund remained on the terrace, frozen by his own weakness, and watched through the windows as Thomas Ashworth claimed yet another dance with the woman. Edmund had just permitted to believe he did not want. The night had grown very cold indeed, though Edmund suspected the frost was entirely of his own making. Somewhere inside him, something had broken. Perhaps his pride, perhaps his heart, perhaps merely the last illusion that he could continue living at a safe distance from genuine feeling. He loved her, and he had let her go, and the torment of his own cowardice would, he suspected, haunt him for far longer than was comfortable to contemplate. The morning following the ball arrived with unseasonable rain, as though the heavens shared Edmund's bleak mood. He had not slept, had spent the dark hours pacing his study at Thornwood House, replaying the terrace conversation with Clara until each word had burned itself into his memory. He had behaved abominably. That much was clear even through the fog of his self-recrimination. She had offered him an opportunity, had all but laid her heart at his feet with that trembling question, and he had responded with bloodless platitudes about her happiness. Coward. The word echoed in his mind with his father's voice, that particular contemptuous tone reserved for moments when Edmund had displayed weakness as a child. Emotional attachment is a luxury we cannot afford, his father had told him repeatedly. We marry for position, for alliance, for the continuation of the line. Sentiment is for those with nothing to lose. Edmund stood at his study window, watching rain stream down the glass, and wondered if his father had been as miserable in his certainty as Edmund now felt in his doubt. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, not bothering to turn from the window. "My lord, Lord Westmere has called and requests an audience." His butler's tone carried a note of careful neutrality that suggested he was aware of undercurrents Edmund would have preferred to keep private. Edmund's stomach clenched. "Show him to the drawing room. I shall attend him presently." He took a moment to compose himself, adjusting his cravat and ensuring his expression revealed nothing. Whatever Thomas wanted, Edmund would face it with the dignity his position demanded, even if that dignity was merely a shell concealing chaos. Thomas stood by the fireplace in the drawing room, looking insufferably pleased with himself. He turned as Edmund entered, his face alight with an enthusiasm Edmund found profoundly irritating. "Thornwood, forgive the early intrusion," Thomas began without preamble. "I could not wait to share my news, and as you introduced us, I felt you deserved to be among the first to know." Edmund felt ice crystallize in his veins. "Know what, precisely?" "I called upon Lady Pemberton and Miss Hartley this morning. Shockingly early, I know, but I could not contain myself. Thornwood, she is extraordinary. Intelligent, accomplished, modest, everything I could hope for in a wife. And I believe she looks upon me favorably as well." Each word landed like a physical blow. Edmund forced himself to remain perfectly still, to maintain his mask of polite interest even as something howled inside him. "You move with remarkable speed, Westmere. When one recognizes quality, there is no point in delay," Thomas replied with infuriating confidence. "I intend to court her properly, of course. I'm not so crude as to propose after a single evening. But I wanted you to know my intentions are entirely honorable. Miss Hartley will want for nothing as my countess. I can offer her a position far beyond what her circumstances might otherwise allow." His countess. The words reverberated through Edmund's skull. Clara as Lady Westmere, mistress of Thomas's vast estates, bearing Thomas's children, sharing Thomas's bed. The images assaulted him with visceral clarity, and Edmund had to call upon every ounce of aristocratic training to prevent himself from physically striking his supposed friend. "I see," Edmund managed, his voice emerging with Arctic coldness. "And have you considered that Miss Hartley might aspire to more than elevation through marriage? That she might wish to be valued for her mind and character, rather than as a fortunate acquisition?" Thomas blinked, clearly taken aback. "I do value her mind and character. What an odd thing to suggest otherwise. Yet you speak of her as one might speak of purchasing a particularly fine piece of horseflesh, assessing her qualities, determining her worth, deciding she meets your requirements." Edmund heard his voice rising and could not seem to prevent it. "Has it occurred to you that she is a person with her own desires and aspirations, not merely a vessel for your ambitions?" "Thornwood, I am not certain what I have done to offend you," Thomas said slowly, his expression shifting from enthusiasm to wariness. "I came here as a courtesy, to inform you of my intentions toward a young woman under your mother's protection. If I have overstepped, you have overstepped nothing." Edmund cut him off sharply. "Miss Hartley is free to entertain whatever suits she wishes. I merely suggest that you approach her with greater respect for her autonomy." Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Edmund watched realization dawn in his friend's eyes. "Good God," Thomas said softly. "You care for her yourself." Do not insult my intelligence with denials, Thornwood. I have known you since we were boys. You have never shown the slightest emotional investment in any woman before, yet here you stand, practically vibrating with suppressed fury because I have expressed interest in Miss Hartley." Thomas's voice gentled slightly. "Why did you not say something? Why did you introduce us if you had feelings for her?" "Because I am a fool. Because I am a coward. Because I could not admit even to myself what she had come to mean to me until it was too late." "My feelings are irrelevant," Edmund said with desperate coldness. "I am not suited to provide Miss Hartley with what she deserves. You apparently believe yourself capable. I wish you both every happiness." "Edmund, I believe our business is concluded, Westmere. I have estate matters requiring my attention." Edmund moved toward the door, desperate to end this conversation, before he completely lost the fragile hold on his composure. Thomas caught his arm as he passed. "You are making a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "I watched her last night. She danced with me, spoke with me, was perfectly cordial. And yet, her eyes followed you constantly. Whatever you believe about your unsuitability, that woman loves you. If you let pride or fear prevent you from pursuing her, you will regret it for the remainder of your life." Edmund pulled his arm free with more force than necessary. "Thank you for your counsel. I shall take it under advisement." He left Thomas standing in the drawing room and retreated to his study, where he proceeded to accomplish absolutely nothing for the next 3 hours. He stared at ledgers without seeing them, attempted to read correspondence without comprehending a word. His mind remained fixed on Clara, on the hope in her eyes on the terrace before he had extinguished it, on the way she had looked at him during those afternoons in the library as though he were someone worth her regard, on the devastating possibility that she might actually accept Thomas's inevitable proposal. Near noon, his mother appeared in the study doorway without bothering to knock. "A privilege only," she retained. "I have just received the most interesting call from Lady Pemberton," she announced without preamble. "It seems Lord Westmere has declared his intentions to court Clara, and Clara has agreed to receive his attentions." Edmund's hand clenched around the pen he was holding, snapping it cleanly in half. Ink spattered across the estate accounts he had been pretending to review. "How wonderful for them both," he said through gritted teeth. His mother crossed the room, extracted a handkerchief, and began wiping the ink from his hands with the same brisk efficiency she had employed when he was a child. "Edmund Ashford, I have been remarkably patient with you, but my patience has reached its limit. You are behaving like a complete fool. I am conducting myself with appropriate propriety. You are conducting yourself like a man determined to destroy his own happiness through sheer obstinacy." She threw the ink-stained handkerchief onto his desk. "That young woman has loved you faithfully for 3 years. She has been patient, hopeful, and dignified in the face of your absolute blindness. And now, when she has finally attracted the notice of another gentleman, one who might actually demonstrate his regard openly, you sit here in your study pretending noble detachment. Mother, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly. You are terrified. You watched your father's cold marriage and concluded that emotional attachment is dangerous. You have spent your adult life avoiding anything that might make you vulnerable, that might require you to risk your precious control." His mother's voice shook with uncharacteristic anger. "But control is not strength, Edmund. It is simply another form of cowardice." The words hit him like a slap. Edmund rose from his chair, moving to the window to escape his mother's penetrating gaze. The rain continued its relentless assault on the glass, and beyond it, London appeared grey and cheerless. "What if I am like him?" Edmund heard himself whisper. "What if I am incapable of being what she needs? What if I fail her the way father failed you?" The silence stretched long enough that Edmund finally turned to face his mother. Her expression had softened, though her eyes remained fierce. "Your father was not incapable of love, Edmund. He was unwilling to try. There is a profound difference." She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You are not him. I have watched you for 29 years, and I have seen your capacity for devotion, for loyalty, for genuine feeling. You protect the people in your care, you shoulder responsibilities without complaint. You act with integrity, even when it costs you. These are not the traits of a man incapable of love." "Then why can I not speak the words?" Edmund's voice broke. "Why, when she asked me directly if I wanted her to refuse Westmere, could I not simply tell her the truth? Because you have spent decades building walls around your heart, and walls do not fall in an instant. But Edmund, those walls are not protecting you. They are imprisoning you. And if you do not find the courage to tear them down, you will lose the one woman who sees past your title and your position to the man beneath." Edmund closed his eyes against the tears that threatened. His mother was right. She was always right, with that infuriating maternal omniscience, but knowing she was right did nothing to solve his fundamental problem. He loved Clara Hartley with an intensity that terrified him precisely because it made him vulnerable in ways he had spent his entire life avoiding. To love her was to risk devastation, to place his happiness in another person's hands, to acknowledge that there were things beyond his control. "What if I speak and she rejects me?" he whispered. "What if I have already destroyed whatever chance I had? Then at least you will know you tried. At least you will not spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." His mother squeezed his hands. "But Edmund, I do not believe she will reject you. I believe she is waiting even now for you to find your courage." Before Edmund could respond, his butler appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "My lord, forgive the interruption. A message has arrived from Lady Pemberton's residence. Miss Hartley requests that any of her personal effects remaining here from the library work be sent to her. She will not be returning to Thornwood Manor." The words landed with crushing finality. Clara was closing the door on whatever had been developing between them, removing herself from his orbit with the quiet determination she brought to everything. Edmund had thought there would be more time, more opportunities to find his courage, but Clara, patient, long-suffering Clara, had apparently reached the limit of her endurance. "Edmund?" His mother's voice seemed to come from a great distance. He became aware that he was still holding his mother's hands, gripping them with enough force that he must be causing pain. He released her abruptly, moving toward the door with sudden, desperate urgency. "I must see her," he said, his voice rough. "I must speak with her before it is too late." "Yes," his mother said simply. "You must." Edmund called for his carriage, paced the entrance hall while it was brought round, and departed into the rain without bothering with a coat or hat. The journey to the Pembertons' modest townhouse in Bloomsbury took less than 20 Minutes but felt eternal. Edmund rehearsed speeches in his mind, discarded them, formulated new ones. Nothing seemed adequate to express the complexity of what he needed to say. The Pembertons' butler, an elderly man who had clearly seen better days, admitted Edmund with some surprise. "My lord, Lady Pemberton is not receiving callers this afternoon. I must speak with Miss Hartley. It is a matter of utmost urgency." The butler's expression suggested he found this declaration highly irregular, but Edmund's title and obvious distress apparently overrode protocol. "I shall inquire if Miss Hartley is available. Please wait in the drawing room." Edmund entered the small, shabby-genteel drawing room and immediately felt out of place. The furniture was worn but scrupulously clean, the decorations modest. This was Clara's world, respectable poverty maintained with dignity, and Edmund realized with sharp clarity how enormous the gulf was between their circumstances. If he asked her to marry him, she would be elevated to a position so far beyond her current status that the transformation would be dizzying. Would she accept him? Or would she believe his proposal was motivated by pity, by some aristocratic condescension? Footsteps in the hall announced someone's arrival, and Edmund turned expectantly, only to find not Clara but Lady Pemberton entering the room. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Edmund detected disapproval in the set of her shoulders. "Lord Thornwood, this is unexpected," she said without warmth. "Lady Pemberton, forgive the intrusion. I must speak with your daughter. It is a matter of considerable importance. I'm afraid Clara is indisposed. She has retired to her room with a headache and does not wish to be disturbed." Edmund heard the lie in her tone, or rather the careful shaping of truth. Clara did not wish to see him, and her mother was protecting her from unwelcome attention. "Please," Edmund said, and heard his voice break on the word. "Please, I know I have no right to make demands, but I beg you, allow me 5 minutes to speak with her. If after that she wishes never to see me again, I will respect her decision." Lady Pemberton studied him with the sharp assessment of a woman who had learned to read men's characters out of necessity. Whatever she saw in Edmund's face must have satisfied some requirement, because her expression softened marginally. "My daughter has loved you for 3 years, Lord Thornwood. She has endured. Your indifference with Grace I frankly found remarkable, but even the most devoted heart has limits, and I fear Clara has reached hers." Lady Pemberton moved closer, her voice dropping. "If you have come here to toy with her affections, to assuage your guilt without offering anything substantial, I will ask you to leave now. She deserves better than to be someone's fleeting conscience." "I love her," Edmund said, and felt the truth of it reverberate through his entire being. "I have been blind, and arrogant and foolish beyond measure, but I love her. I need to tell her so. I need to ask her, to beg her if necessary, for the honor of her hand. If she refuses me, I will accept it. But please, let me at least speak the words I should have spoken weeks ago." Lady Pemberton's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. She nodded once sharply. "Wait here." She departed, leaving Edmund alone in the modest drawing room with his racing heart and desperate hopes. Minutes passed. 5, 10 perhaps. More. Edmund began to fear that Clara had refused even to see him, that he had destroyed whatever chance he might have had. Then she appeared in the doorway. Clara wore a simple day dress in grey muslin, her hair arranged plainly, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, and Edmund realized with devastating clarity that he had done this to her, had caused this suffering through his cowardice and pride. "Miss Hartley," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No," she said quietly, and her voice trembled despite obvious efforts at control. "No, my lord, I cannot bear this. Whatever you have come to say, please spare us both. I have made my decision to encourage Lord Westmere's suit, and I would ask you to respect it." "I cannot." Edmund took a step toward her, saw her flinch and stopped. "Clara, may I call you Clara? I know I have forfeited any right to familiarity, but please, you have forfeited nothing, because you never claimed anything," she said, and now anger sparked in her eyes alongside the pain. "For 3 years I have stood beside you. I have been useful, decorative when needed, invisible when convenient. I have loved you with every particle of my being, and you have looked through me as though I were no more substantial than air." "I know," Edmund whispered. "I know, and I am ashamed beyond words. And now Lord Westmere, who is kind and honorable and genuinely interested in me, has offered his attentions, and suddenly you appear at my door." Clara's voice rose slightly, passion breaking through her usual composure. "What am I to make of this, my lord? Am I to believe you have suddenly developed feelings after years of indifference? Or is this merely aristocratic possessiveness, a man who does not want something until another man shows interest?" The accusation struck deep because Edmund could not entirely refute it. Had he truly loved her before Westmere's interest, or had jealousy simply revealed what had been growing unacknowledged? He searched his heart and found only honest confusion. "I do not know when it began," he admitted, the words emerging raw and unpolished. "I cannot pinpoint the precise moment I fell in love with you. Perhaps it was during those afternoons in the library. Or perhaps it began years ago and I was simply too blind to recognize it. But Clara, I swear to you, what I feel now is not possessiveness or competition. It is love. Genuine, terrifying, overwhelming love." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Pretty words, my lord, but words mean nothing without action, and your actions have demonstrated clearly what I am worth to you." "Then allow me to act," Edmund said desperately. He moved toward her, dropping to his knees before her, in a gesture that would have scandalized society, but which felt like the only appropriate posture for what he needed to express. "Clara Hartley, I am a fool. I am proud and frightened and utterly unworthy of you. But I love you with a devotion I did not know myself capable of feeling. I am asking, no, I am begging, for the chance to prove that to you, to spend the remainder of my life demonstrating through every action what my words have failed to convey." Clara stared down at him, her expression a tumult of emotions Edmund could not fully pass. "My lord, please stand. This is not appropriate." "Nothing about this is appropriate," Edmund said, remaining on his knees. "Appropriate would have been courting you properly from the beginning. Appropriate would have been recognizing your worth when you first entered my life. But I have never been appropriate when it mattered most, and I will not begin now by pretending dignity when what I feel is desperation." "You do not love me," Clara whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You cannot. I am nobody, nothing." "You are everything," Edmund interrupted fiercely. "You are intelligent, accomplished, brave, and beautiful in ways that transcend mere appearance. You have challenged me, seen me truly, stood beside me without expectation of reward. You are the finest person I have ever known, and I have been too cowardly to acknowledge it until the prospect of losing you forced me to confront my own wretchedness." The tears Clara had been holding back finally fell, tracking down her cheeks in silver lines. "Why now?" she asked brokenly. "Why, after 3 years, do you suddenly profess love precisely when I have decided to move forward with my life?" It was the question Edmund had been dreading, the one for which he had no good answer. "Because I am human and flawed, and sometimes we do not recognize what we possess until we are about to lose it. Because watching Westmere dance with you made me realize I could not bear a lifetime of watching you belong to someone else. Because your question on the terrace shattered something in me, and I have been unable to piece myself back together without you." He reached for her hands, relief flooding through him, when she did not pull away. "I know my timing is abysmal. I know I have given you every reason to doubt my sincerity. But Clara, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I love you. I love you, and I am asking for the chance to be worthy of your love in return." Clara looked down at their joined hands, at Edmund still kneeling before her, and the silence stretched until Edmund thought his heart might actually cease beating from the tension. "Please," he whispered. "Please, Clara. I need time," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I need to think. I need to determine if this is real or simply another moment where you will withdraw once you have secured what you want." The words stung, but Edmund could not contest them. He had given her no reason to trust his constancy. "How long?" he asked. "How much time do you need?" "I do not know." Clara gently extracted her hands from his grasp, and Edmund felt the loss like a physical wound. "Lord Westmere is calling again. Tomorrow. He has been clear about his intentions and his regard. I owe him and myself the courtesy of considering his suit fairly. And will you consider mine?" Edmund rose slowly to his feet, no longer caring that his dignity was in shreds around him. "I do not know what yours is," Clara said simply. "You have spoken of love, but you have made no actual proposal. You have declared feelings, but offered no vision of a future. What exactly are you asking of me, my lord?" Edmund realized with shock that she was right. In his desperation to simply speak the words, he had failed to articulate what he actually wanted. He steadied himself, drawing on reserves of courage he had not known he possessed. "I am asking you to marry me," he said clearly. "I am asking you to become my Viscountess, my wife, my partner in all things. I am asking for the privilege of spending the remainder of my life loving you, honoring you, and working daily to deserve the gift of your presence. I am asking you to save me from the cold, empty existence I was consigning myself to through sheer stubbornness. Clara Hartley, will you marry me?" The proposal hung between them, raw and unadorned, lacking all the romantic trappings such moments were supposed to contain. There was no ring, no carefully planned setting, no elegant speech. There was only Edmund's desperate honesty and Clara's tears. "I will consider it," she whispered. "That is all I can promise you now. I will consider both proposals, and I will make my decision with care." But Edmund, she used his given name for the first time, and he felt it like a benediction. "If I accept you, it must be because I believe in your sincerity, not simply because I have loved you for so long. I will not enter a marriage where I spend my life wondering if you will wake one morning and realize you made a terrible mistake." "You have my word that will never happen," Edmund said fervently. "Whatever else I am, whatever faults I possess, I am not. Inconstant. Once I commit myself, it is absolute. Then give me time to believe that," Clara said. She moved toward the door, clearly ending their interview. "Please go now, Edmund. I cannot think clearly with you here, and I need clarity above all else." Edmund wanted to protest, wanted to remain until he had extracted some promise, some assurance that he still had a chance. But he had demanded enough from her today. He had arrived uninvited, made declarations she had not asked for, and pressed his suit with an urgency that bordered on impropriety. The least he could give her now was the time she requested. "I will await your decision," he said formally. "Whatever you choose, know that my regard for you will remain unchanged." He bowed and departed, passing Lady Pemberton in the hallway. She said nothing, but her expression suggested she had heard at least parts of the conversation. Edmund let himself out into the rain, which had intensified during his time inside, and stood on the doorstep for a long moment, letting the cold water soak through his clothes. He had spoken the words. He had made the proposal. He had laid bare his heart in a manner that terrified him still, and now he could only wait, suspended between the possibility of unprecedented joy and the certainty of devastating loss, while the woman he loved decided whether his belated declaration deserved her faith. 3 days passed with no word from Clara, and Edmund discovered that waiting for a woman's decision was perhaps the most exquisite torture ever devised. He could not eat, could not sleep, could not focus on the simplest estate matters. He attended a dinner at his club and had no recollection afterwards of what had been discussed. He rode through Hyde Park and nearly collided with another rider because his attention was fixed entirely inward, replaying his proposal and cataloguing all the ways he had failed to express himself adequately. His mother watched these developments with a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction that Edmund found simultaneously comforting and irritating. "You are behaving precisely as a man in love should behave," she observed on the evening of the third day, finding him once again in his study, staring at correspondence he could not bring himself to address. "I am behaving like a lunatic," Edmund corrected bitterly. "I have allowed a woman to reduce me to this pathetic state of suspended animation. You have allowed yourself to feel genuine emotion. For the first time in your adult life," his mother countered. "It is uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar, not because it is wrong." Edmund pushed away from his desk and began pacing the room's perimeter, a habit he had developed over these interminable days. "What if she refuses me? What if she accepts Westmere instead? He's a good man, Mother. He can offer her everything I can and more. Enthusiasm, uncomplicated affection, the devotion she deserves. He can offer her everything except being." "You," his mother said quietly, "and you are the one she loves." "Loved," Edmund corrected hollowly. "Past tense. I may have destroyed that love through sheer neglect." Before his mother could respond, the butler appeared in the doorway. "My lord, Lady Pemberton and Miss Hartley have called. They are in the blue drawing room." Edmund's heart stopped, then resumed beating with such force he thought it might actually escape his chest. "Both of them?" "Yes, my lord. Lady Pemberton specifically. Requested your presence, and the Dowager Viscountess's." Edmund exchanged glances with his mother, unable to interpret whether this was positive or devastating news. Ladies bringing their mothers to such meetings typically signified either the acceptance of a proposal or the need for witnesses to a formal rejection. He had no idea which scenario Clara intended. "We shall attend them immediately," his mother said, when Edmund seemed incapable of speech. They descended to the drawing room together, and Edmund experienced the surreal sensation of approaching what might be either his salvation or his destruction. He paused outside the door, suddenly paralyzed by fear. His mother touched his arm gently. "Whatever happens, you have been brave. That matters." Then they entered, and Edmund saw Clara standing by the window overlooking the square, her back to the room. She wore a day dress of pale yellow that caught the afternoon light, and her posture was rigid with tension that Edmund felt mirrored in his own body. Lady Pemberton sat on the settee, her expression carefully neutral. "Lady Pemberton, Miss Hartley, how good of you to call," Edmund's mother said warmly, moving to embrace Lady Pemberton, while Edmund remained frozen near the door. Clara turned slowly to face him, and Edmund searched her expression desperately for some indication of her decision. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she had been crying recently, but her composure was otherwise perfect. She looked at him. Directly and in her gaze, Edmund saw the weight of the 3 days she had spent considering his proposal. "My lord," she said softly, "thank you for receiving us." "Always," Edmund managed, his voice rough. "You are always welcome in this house, Clara." His use of her given name caused her to flinch slightly, though whether from pleasure or pain he could not determine. The silence stretched unbearably until finally Clara's mother spoke. "Perhaps, Harriet, you might show me the new roses in your conservatory. I understand they are quite spectacular this season." Edmund's mother, bless her, understood the hint immediately. "Of course, Sarah. They are absolutely magnificent. Let us leave these young people to their discussion." The two matrons departed with far more haste than grace, and then Edmund was alone with Clara and the terrible, beautiful uncertainty of her presence. "Would you care to sit?" he offered, gesturing toward the settee. "I prefer to stand, thank you." Clara remained by the window, maintaining physical distance that felt symbolic of something larger. "I have come to give you my answer to your proposal, my lord. I felt I owed you the courtesy of delivering it in person, rather than by letter." Edmund's stomach dropped. The formality of her tone suggested rejection, but he forced himself to remain composed. "I appreciate your consideration. I have given your offer extensive thought," Clara continued, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I have examined my own heart with as much honesty as I can muster. I have prayed for guidance, sought my mother's counsel, and spent considerable time reflecting on what I know of your character and what I have observed of your behavior these past 3 years. And?" Edmund could not keep the desperate edge from his voice. Clara's expression crumbled slightly before she mastered it. "And I have concluded that I cannot accept your proposal." The words landed like physical blows. Edmund felt the room tilt, felt something fundamental tear loose inside his chest. He had known this was possible, probable even given how abominably he had treated her, but knowing had not prepared him for the devastating reality. "I see," he whispered, because what else could he say? "No," Clara said with sudden fierceness. "I do not believe you do see. You think I am refusing you because I doubt your sincerity, or because I prefer Lord Westmere, or because I wish to punish you for your years of indifference. Are those not your reasons?" Edmund forced himself to meet her eyes despite the pain. "They are not." Clara moved toward him finally, closing the distance she had maintained. "I am refusing you because I love you too much to accept a proposal born of panic and jealousy rather than genuine conviction." Edmund stared at her, trying to process this reasoning. "I do not understand." "Edmund, you have spent your entire life avoiding emotional vulnerability. You watched your parents' cold marriage and concluded That love was dangerous. And then I appeared, and I began to matter to you in ways that terrified you. So you ignored me, dismissed me, tried to render me invisible so you could maintain your precious control." Clara's voice shook, but she continued steadily. "Then Lord Westmere showed interest, and suddenly you were forced to confront the possibility of losing me. You panicked. You made desperate declarations. But Edmund, have you actually dealt with your fear, or have you simply transferred it into a different form?" The observation struck with devastating accuracy. Edmund opened his mouth to protest, to insist that his love was genuine, but the words died before he could voice them. Was she right? Had he simply reacted to the threat of loss without actually addressing the fundamental terror that had prevented him from recognizing his feelings earlier? "I love you," he said, because it was the only truth he could articulate with certainty. "I know you do," Clara replied gently. "I have always known, even when you did not. But loving someone is not sufficient, Edmund. Marriage requires more than love. It requires trust, communication, vulnerability, the willingness to share one's deepest self with another person, and I do not believe you are ready for that." "Then let me prove I am ready," Edmund said desperately. "Let me demonstrate." "How?" Clara interrupted. "By courting me properly while you struggle against every instinct that tells you to protect yourself? By forcing yourself through the motions of romance, while your heart remains locked behind walls you spent decades constructing? Edmund, you would grow to resent me. You would feel trapped by the very emotions you claim to embrace, and I love you too much to watch that happen." Tears streamed freely down her face now, and Edmund realized she was crying not from anger, but from profound grief. The grief of choosing wisely over choosing what one desperately wanted. "What do you want from me?" Edmund asked, his own voice breaking. "Tell me what to do, Clara. Tell me how to fix this." "I want you to leave London," she said softly. "I want you to go to Thornwood Manor, or to your estate in Derbyshire, anywhere away from society's pressures and expectations. I want you to spend time alone, truly alone, examining what you want from life. Not what your father expected, not what society demands, not what you think you should want, what you actually want." "I want you," Edmund said fiercely. "That is what I know, with absolute certainty." "Then prove it by doing the work required to truly have me," Clara replied. "Learn to be vulnerable. Learn to communicate. Learn to let someone see all of you, not merely the aristocratic facade you present to the world. And then, if you still want me after that, if you can honestly say you are ready for the kind of partnership marriage requires, come back and ask me again." "And if you have married Westmere by then?" The question emerged bitter and desperate. Clara smiled sadly. "I have refused Lord Westmere's suit. I told him yesterday that I could not accept his addresses because my heart belongs to someone else. He was disappointed but gracious. So no, I will not be marrying Lord Westmere." Hope flared in Edmund's chest, but Clara held up a hand to forestall whatever he might have said. "But I will not sit idle waiting for you either," she warned. "I am 26, Edmund. I have spent 3 years loving you from a distance. If you require another, 3 years to discover whether you can actually be the partner I need. I may not be available when you return. Life does not pause simply because we wish it to." The warning was clear. She was giving him an opportunity, but not an unlimited one. He must do the work she described and do it with enough urgency that she was still free when he completed it. "How long?" Edmund asked. "How much time do you think I need?" "I cannot answer that. Only you can determine when you have truly changed. When you have done the internal work required. But Edmund," she stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent she favored, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "I will know if you have not. I will know if you return still carrying those walls, still afraid of genuine intimacy. And if that is the case, I will refuse you again. Do you understand?" He understood. She was not going to settle for the man he was now, the man who could speak words of love, but who remained fundamentally terrified of what those words required. She wanted the man he might become, the man who could stand before her without armor, without defense, offering his complete and honest self. It was the most frightening thing anyone had ever asked of him. "I will do it," Edmund said quietly. "I will go to Derbyshire. I will do whatever work is necessary. And Clara, I will come back transformed, or I will not come back at all. Clara's expression softened into something that looked almost like pride. That is what I needed to hear. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his face with infinite gentleness. I love you, Edmund Ashford. I have loved you for 3 years, and I suspect I will love you for the rest of my life, regardless of what you decide. But I love myself too much to accept less than I deserve. And you deserve better than to spend your life half present, half available, always holding part of yourself in reserve. Edmund caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek, felt the warmth of her palm against his skin. When I return, if you accept me then, I swear to you I will spend every day proving worthy of your faith. I know, Clara whispered. That is why I am letting you go. She extracted her hand gently, stepped back and moved toward the door. Before she reached it, she turned one final time. The library at Thornwood Manor remains only partially catalogued, she said, and a ghost of her gentle humor touched her voice. When you are ready, truly ready, perhaps we might finish the work together. Then she was gone, taking her mother with her, leaving Edmund alone in the drawing room with his mother, who had apparently been waiting just outside. Well, his mother demanded. She refused me, Edmund said, his voice empty. She refused me and told me to leave London to work on myself. His mother studied him for a long moment. And will you? Edmund thought of Clara's tears, of her quiet courage in refusing what she desperately wanted, because accepting it would harm them both. He thought of her challenge, to do the work required, to become someone capable of genuine partnership, to dismantle the defenses he had spent a lifetime constructing. Yes, he said slowly. I will go to Derbyshire tomorrow. I do not know how long I will be gone. But mother, when I return, I will not be the same man who left. His mother crossed to him, embraced him tightly. I am proud of you, she said softly. Your father never had. The courage to do what you are about to attempt. But you are not him, Edmund. You are better. You can be better. That night, Edmund packed for an indefinite stay in Derbyshire, instructed his steward on estate matters, and sat in his study, writing letters to various acquaintances explaining his absence. The ton would speculate wildly, he was aware of that, but their gossip seemed suddenly irrelevant compared to the work ahead of him. Before he retired, he stood in the library where he and Clara had spent those golden afternoons, surrounded by thousands of books and the ghost of her presence. He thought of her challenge, her faith that he could change, her devastating refusal to settle for less than she deserved. He loved her. That truth remained solid and unshakable. But she was right. Love alone was insufficient. He needed to become someone worthy of her love, someone capable of reciprocating it fully, without reservation or defense. The journey ahead would be difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing he had ever attempted. But Clara Hartley, patient, brave, quietly magnificent Clara, was worth any amount of difficulty. He left London the following morning as dawn broke over Berkeley Square, headed for the Derbyshire Hills and whatever transformation awaited him there. Behind him, the city continued its relentless social whirl. Ahead lay silence, solitude, and the terrifying prospect of confronting himself without distraction. Clara watched from her window as his carriage departed, tears streaming down her face, and prayed that the man who returned would be the one she had always believed existed beneath the armor. 6 months later, as autumn painted the Derbyshire landscape in shades of amber and gold, Edmund Ashford stood at the window of Thornwood Hall and acknowledged that he was a different man than the one who had arrived here in spring. The transformation had not come easily. Nothing worthwhile ever did, but it had come nevertheless, through long months of solitude, reflection, and the painful work of dismantling a lifetime of defensive patterns. He had written letters to Clara weekly, though he had not sent them. They filled a leather-bound journal now, a record of his internal journey, the discoveries, the setbacks, the moments of breakthrough when he recognized patterns he had carried since childhood. He wrote about his father, about his own fears, about the ways he had learned to perform rather than feel. He wrote about shame and pride and the gradual, terrifying process of learning to be honest with himself. He had walked the estate daily, reacquainted himself with tenants he had known all his life but never truly seen. He had listened to their stories, their joys and struggles, and learned that genuine connection required presence rather than performative nobility. He had dismissed most of his staff for the duration of his stay, keeping only a minimal household, forcing himself to exist without the social buffers his position typically provided. He had read voraciously, hungrily books on philosophy and human nature that his grandfather had collected, but which Edmund had previously dismissed as impractical. He had discovered poets who wrote of love with an honesty that made his chest ache. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that vulnerability was not weakness, but rather the foundation of genuine strength. And he had mourned. He had grieved the years he had wasted in emotional isolation, the connections he had refused, the life he might have lived if he had possessed the courage to feel deeply sooner. The mourning was necessary. His correspondence with a thoughtful clergyman in the nearby village had helped him understand, because one could not move forward without first acknowledging what had been lost. Now, as he prepared to return to London, Edmund felt both transformed and terrified. He was not perfect. He doubted anyone could achieve perfection in such matters, but he was genuinely different. He had learned to recognize when he was withdrawing into self-protection, had developed tools for remaining present, even when discomfort urged retreat. He had practiced vulnerability in small ways, writing honest letters to his mother, having authentic conversations with his steward, allowing his true thoughts and feelings to exist without constant censorship. Whether it would be enough, whether Clara would deem his transformation sufficient, remained to be seen. He had received letters from his mother throughout his absence, carefully crafted missives that avoided direct mention of Clara, while managing to convey essential information. Clara remained in London. She had not accepted any gentleman's addresses. She asked after Edmund, with a frequency that suggested her feelings had not altered. But she had also established herself with increasing independence, had begun giving music lessons to supplement her mother's modest income, had joined a ladies' intellectual society, had carved out a life that did not require Edmund's presence. The realization that she was building a life without him had initially devastated Edmund, but his months of reflection had helped him understand its significance. Clara was not waiting passively for his return. She was not sitting idle, hoping he would rescue her from modest circumstances. She was living, actively, purposefully, creating meaning on her own terms. It made him love her even more fiercely, if such a thing were possible. Edmund departed Derbyshire on a crisp October morning, his traveling cases loaded not just with clothing, but with the journal containing his unsent letters and a carefully wrapped package that represented his hopes for the future. The journey to London took 2 days, and Edmund spent them in alternating states of anticipation and dread. What if she had changed her mind? What if 6 months had been too long, and she had concluded that Edmund was not worth the wait? What if he arrived to discover her engaged too? Someone else? Some other gentleman who had recognized her worth and pursued her with appropriate dedication? These fears assaulted him repeatedly, but Edmund had learned during his months in Derbyshire to sit with discomfort rather than immediately seeking to escape it. He acknowledged the fears, examined them, and chose to proceed regardless. Whatever Clara's decision, he would respect it. He had done the work she requested, had transformed himself in fundamental ways, and if that proved insufficient, he would accept her choice with dignity. He would be devastated, but he would survive. That was what these months had taught him, that he possessed inner resources beyond what he had credited, that he could endure emotional pain without being destroyed by it. Edmund arrived at Thornwood House near midnight, surprising his butler and disturbing no one else. His mother had departed for a friend's house party in Hampshire, he learned, and would not return for another week. This was both disappointing. He had hoped to consult with her, and perhaps fortunate, as it meant he would have time to compose himself before attempting to see Clara. Except Edmund discovered, lying awake in his chamber that night, that he could not wait. The thought of being in the same city as Clara without seeing her, without knowing whether his transformation had been sufficient, was unbearable. Dawn found him already dressed, pacing his study, willing the clock toward a reasonable hour for making morning calls. At 9:30, still shockingly early by society standards, Edmund set out for the Pembertons' townhouse. The October morning was cool and bright, the air sharp with the promise of coming winter. Edmund walked rather than taking his carriage, needing the movement to burn off some of the nervous energy that threatened to overwhelm him. He rehearsed speeches in his mind, then discarded them. Clara did not want pretty words. She wanted honesty, authenticity, genuine communication. He would offer her truth, unadorned and undefended, and trust that it would be sufficient. The Pembertons' butler admitted him with surprise, but without question. Apparently, Edmund's months of absence had done nothing to diminish his welcome at this house. He was shown to the familiar drawing room and left to wait, while the butler inquired after the ladies' availability. Edmund stood in the center of the modest room, holding the package he had brought, and felt the full weight of the moment descend upon him. Everything he had worked toward these past 6 months converged on what would happen in the next few minutes. His entire future, his hope of happiness, of partnership, of love, depended on how Clara received him and whether she believed his transformation genuine. Then she appeared in the doorway, and Edmund forgot to breathe. She wore a morning dress of deep green that brought out the warmth in her complexion, her hair arranged simply, her expression carefully neutral. But her eyes, her beautiful, intelligent eyes, widened at the sight of him, and Edmund saw hope and fear warring in their depths. "My lord," she said softly, "you have returned." "I have returned," Edmund confirmed, his voice rough from emotion. "Clara, I know this call is unexpected. I know I have no right to appear unannounced after 6 months of absence, but I could not wait another day to see you." Clara moved into the room, maintaining physical distance between them. "You look well," she observed. "Different somehow." "I am different," Edmund said simply. "I have spent these months doing precisely what you instructed, examining myself, confronting my fears, learning to be vulnerable. I do not claim to be perfect, Clara. I doubt I shall ever be perfect. But I am changed in fundamental ways that I hope will prove sufficient." Clara's hands twisted together, the only visible sign of her agitation. "What does changed mean, Edmund? What precisely have you done these past months?" Edmund had anticipated this question, had known she would not simply accept vague pronouncements of transformation. He set down his package and withdrew the leather journal from his coat. "I wrote to you," he said, offering her the journal. "Every week, sometimes more frequently. I did not send the letters because they were not meant for reading. They were meant for honest self-examination. But they contain everything I have been thinking, feeling, discovering, every fear I have confronted, every pattern I have recognized, every moment of breakthrough and setback. I want you to read them, Clara. I want you to see the work I have done." Clara accepted the journal with trembling hands, opening it to reveal page after page of Edmund's precise handwriting. She read a few lines, then looked up at him with tears glistening. "You wrote about your father," she whispered. "I wrote about many things, but yes, predominantly about my father, and how his choices shaped my understanding of love and marriage. I had to understand him before I could separate my identity from his example." Edmund moved closer, still maintaining respectful distance. "I consulted with a clergyman in Derbyshire, a thoughtful man with some training in matters of the soul. He helped me recognize that I had conflated love with weakness, that I believed emotional connection made one vulnerable to unbearable pain. My father avoided genuine intimacy because he feared what it might demand of him, and I had unconsciously adopted that. Same defensive posture. And now," Clara's voice trembled, "now I understand that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the foundation of genuine connection. I understand that loving someone deeply does indeed make one vulnerable to pain, but that the richness such love provides outweighs the risk. I understand that marriage should not be a transaction or a duty, but rather a partnership between equals who choose daily to see and value one another." Edmund heard his voice gaining strength. "Confidence. I understand that you were right, Clara. Love alone was insufficient. I needed to become someone capable of receiving and reciprocating love fully, without reservation." Clara clutched the journal to her chest, her tears falling freely now. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you will not wake one morning and revert to the man you were before?" "You do not," Edmund admitted with painful honesty. "I cannot offer you certainty because human beings are complex and fallible. I Cannot promise I will never struggle with old patterns or occasionally retreat into self-protection, but I can promise you this. I am committed to the work of remaining present, vulnerable, and honest. I have learned to recognize when I begin withdrawing, and I have developed tools for choosing connection instead. Will I sometimes fail? Almost certainly. But I will fail while trying, Clara, not while hiding. He took a step closer, and this time Clara did not retreat. I love you, Edmund continued, his voice breaking. I loved you when I left London 6 months ago, but I loved you in a limited way, a way that would have ultimately harmed us both because I could not offer you the full partnership you deserved. Now I love you with my complete self. I love you enough to be vulnerable, to communicate honestly even when it is uncomfortable, to share my fears and doubts rather than concealing them behind aristocratic composure. I love you enough to be imperfect in your presence, to ask for help when I need it, to build a life together rather than simply offering you a place in mine. Clara was openly weeping now, and Edmund found tears tracking down his own face. Tears he would once have considered shameful, but which now felt simply honest. The question, Edmund said gently, is whether you can believe me, whether my transformation is sufficient, whether you are willing to risk your heart on a man who has already proven he can hurt you deeply. He reached for the package he had set aside, offered it to her with shaking hands. This is for you regardless of your answer. I want you to have it even if you refuse me. Clara set down the journal and accepted the package, unwrapping it with careful precision. Inside lay a leather-bound volume, the Aeneid in the original Latin, a beautiful edition clearly quite old and valuable. It was my grandfather's, Edmund explained softly, one of his most treasured possessions. You mentioned once during our afternoons in the library that you had never owned your own copy of Virgil, that you had only ever been able to borrow one from your father's small collection. I want you to have this, Clara, not because I am attempting to purchase your affections with gifts, but because it represents something significant. My grandfather was the one member of my family who understood the value of genuine feeling, who loved deeply and openly despite the social costs. This book belonged to him, and now it belongs to you because you have taught me to value what he valued. Clara traced her fingers over the embossed leather, fresh tears spilling. Edmund, this is too precious. You are precious, Edmund interrupted. You are the most precious person in my world, and you deserve to possess things of beauty that honor your intellect and passions. They stood there for a long moment, the morning light streaming through the windows, the precious book held between them like a promise. Clara looked up finally, her expression raw and honest and so full of emotion that Edmund felt his heart might simply cease from the intensity. Ask me again, she whispered. Ask me properly. Hope surged through Edmund with such force that he felt light-headed. He dropped to one knee before her, as he had 6 months earlier, but this time without desperation, with quiet certainty instead. Clara Hartley, I am asking for the honor of your hand in marriage. I am asking you to be my wife, my partner, my dearest companion. I am asking you to build a life with me, not to simply occupy a place I have prepared, but to actively create something new together. I promise you honesty, vulnerability, and the dedication to continue growing and changing. I promise you my complete self, flawed and imperfect, but genuinely yours. Will you marry me? Clara knelt before him, bringing herself to his level, the Aeneid still clutched in one hand. With her free hand, she touched his face with the same gentleness she had displayed 6 months earlier, but this time without reservation. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Edmund, I will marry you. Edmund felt something break open in his chest, not pain, but rather the opposite, a flooding of warmth and light and relief so profound he could not contain it. He caught her face in his hands and kissed her, properly kissed her for the first time, pouring into that kiss all the love and devotion and gratitude that words could not adequately express. Clara responded with equal fervor, her free arm coming around his neck, the book pressed between them like a talisman. They knelt there on the drawing room floor, kissing like the young lovers they had never been allowed to be, making up for 3 years of restraint and 6 months of separation. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, both flushed and disheveled, Edmund rested his forehead against Clara's and felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. "I missed you desperately," he confessed. "Every day in Derbyshire, I thought of you. Every change I made, every breakthrough I achieved, it was all for you, Clara, to become worthy of you. You were always worthy," Clara said softly. "You simply needed to believe it yourself." They remained kneeling for a long while, simply holding each other, until the sound of footsteps in the hall reminded them that they were not, in fact, alone in the house. They rose hastily, attempting to compose themselves just as Lady Pemberton appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, her daughter's flushed face and tear-stained cheeks, Edmund's obvious emotion, the discarded wrapping paper and the precious book, and her expression softened into joy. "I take it Lord Thornwood has made you an acceptable offer?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "He has," Clara confirmed, moving to embrace her mother. "He has asked me to marry him, and I have accepted." Lady Pemberton held her daughter tightly, then extended a hand to Edmund. "Welcome to our family, my lord, though I confess I have considered you part of it for quite some time." "Thank you," Edmund said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, I will spend my life honoring your daughter and working to deserve the faith you have both placed in me." "See that you do," Lady Pemberton replied, but her tone was warm. "Now, I suspect you two have much to discuss. I shall leave you alone, properly chaperoned by an open door, of course, while I write to your mother, Lord Thornwood. She will be absolutely delighted." She departed, leaving Edmund and Clara alone once more. They moved to sit together on the settee, close enough that their shoulders touched, hands clasped between them. "When would you like to marry?" Edmund asked. "I confess I would prefer immediately, but I recognize you may wish for a proper courtship period." Clara laughed, the sound like music. "I think we have had quite enough courtship already. 3 years of suppressed feelings and 6 months of separation. I should be content with a relatively brief engagement. Perhaps we might marry after Christmas." "Perfect," Edmund agreed. "That gives us time to prepare properly without unnecessary delay." "And Clara," he hesitated, suddenly uncertain, "where would you like to live?" "I have estates in Derbyshire, Yorkshire, and of course Thornwood Manor, plus the London house. I want you to feel at home, not simply installed in my preferred location." The fact that he had thought to ask this, that he was considering her preferences rather than simply announcing his decisions, made Clara's eyes fill with fresh tears. "I should like to spend part of the year in London, as I have commitments now with the music students I teach and the literary society I have joined, but I think I should prefer the majority of our time at Thornwood Manor. The library there remains unfinished after all." Edmund smiled, remembering her parting words 6 months earlier. "Yes, I seem to recall you mentioning that. Perhaps we might complete the cataloguing together. Though I warn you, I may prove quite distracting during the work." Clara blushed beautifully. "I believe I can tolerate some distraction." They spoke for hours, making plans and sharing the experiences of their months apart. Clara described the independence she had cultivated, the satisfaction she found in teaching music to young ladies whose families could not afford elaborate masters. Edmund shared more details of his journey in Derbyshire, the painful and liberating work of confronting his emotional patterns. "There is something else I should tell you," Edmund said eventually, his tone growing serious. "I have been corresponding with a solicitor about settling a substantial sum on you independently, money that would be yours regardless of our marriage, to use as you see fit. I do not want you ever to feel financially dependent on me in ways that would prevent you from speaking honestly or maintaining your autonomy." Clara stared at him, clearly astonished. "Edmund, that is extraordinarily generous, but also quite unusual. Most gentlemen would never consider—" "I am not most gentlemen, and ours will not be most marriages," Edmund interrupted firmly. "I have spent these months learning that genuine partnership requires equality in all things, including financial matters. I want you to have resources of your own, Clara. I want you to maintain your music teaching if it brings you joy, or pursue any other interests that engage your considerable intellect. I do not want you to feel that marriage to me means the cessation of your independence." Clara leaned forward and kissed him softly, a kiss of gratitude and love. "You have changed," she whispered against his lips. "You have genuinely, fundamentally changed. Because you demanded it, Edmund replied. Because you refused to settle for less than what a marriage should be. You saved me, Clara. From myself, from repeating my father's mistakes, from a life of emotional isolation. You saved me by having the courage to refuse me when I was not ready. And you saved yourself by doing the work required to become ready, Clara countered. That was your courage, Edmund. Your choice. Your transformation. They remained together until the afternoon light began to fade, finally separating when Clara insisted Edmund should return home to prepare for the inevitable social whirlwind their engagement would create. Edmund departed reluctantly, but secure in the knowledge that this separation was temporary, that Clara was his now and he was hers, and they would build something beautiful together. As he walked back through London's streets, Edmund felt lighter than he had in years, perhaps in his entire life. The work was not finished. He would need to continue practicing vulnerability, communication, honesty. There would be moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, when he would need to consciously choose connection over self-protection. But Clara would be beside him, Clara who loved him enough to demand his best self, Clara who had stood beside him for 3 years unacknowledged, then refused his belated proposal until he proved worthy of her faith. Clara who had waited until he was ready to be truly seen, and then chosen to see him anyway. The season of 1848 would begin soon, and with it would come the announcement of their engagement. Society would speculate, gossip, express surprise or approval depending on their inclinations. But Edmund found he did not care about society's opinion. He cared only about the woman who had taught him that love required courage, that vulnerability was strength, that genuine partnership demanded the willingness to be honest, even when honesty was uncomfortable. He cared only about spending the rest of his life loving Clara Hartley with the devotion she deserved, and had waited so patiently to receive. The library at Thornwood Manor awaited their return. Thousands of volumes, still uncatalogued, work still unfinished. But Edmund suspected that completing that project would take considerably longer than originally anticipated, given how frequently they would likely become distracted by each other. He found he was very much looking forward to those distractions. For the first time in his 29 years, Edmund Ashford, Viscount Thornwood, was genuinely, completely, wonderfully happy. And as he stood at the window of his study that evening, watching the stars emerge, over London he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the quiet woman in grey, who had loved him before he was worthy, refused him until he became so, and then offered him the extraordinary gift of her heart. He would, he vowed, spend every remaining day proving himself deserving of that gift. And somewhere across the city, Clara Hartley sat in her modest room, reading by candlelight the leather journal containing Edmund's unsent letters, and wept tears of joy at the transformation those pages revealed. They would marry after Christmas. They would build a life together. They would finish cataloguing the library, teach music to talented students, read Virgil together by firelight, and create the sort of partnership that Edmund's grandfather had once demonstrated. Genuine, vulnerable, honest love. It would not be perfect, but it would be real. And for two people who had spent years either overlooking or being overlooked, real was everything they had ever needed.